Hi, and welcome to the meeting of the Rotary E-Club of District 7710 on May 18, 2021. I am Doris Wallace, the E-Club president. Speaker this evening is Aleta Ballard. She will be introduced by our own Rotarian, Pamela Barrett. So Pam, I turn it over to you. Thank you. Pam? Pam?
Good evening, please bear with me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
No.
Can you hear me?
If you could speak up just a little louder. You can, but it's very low.
Okay, good. Good evening. This evening, I have the great pleasure of introducing Attorney Aleta Ballard. It's also my
Pam,
daughter.
your voice is messing up.
I don't know what to say. Aleta is the founder and managing attorney of Ballard Law Firm, PLLC, in Smithfield, North Carolina. Aleta practices in the area of DWI offense, felonies, drug offenses, sex crime, domestic violence, and our topic this evening, juvenile defense. Aleta is a graduate of Wake Forest School of Law and a native of Maryland. Following admission to the North Carolina Bar in 2006, Aleta served as a prosecutor for the Office of the District Attorney in Johnston County. And it quickly apparent to her there was a real need for criminal defense attorneys to fight hard for their clients. Aleta has considerable trial experience, and she is a recent graduate from the National Criminal Defense College, a guest speaker instructor at the University of North Carolina School of Government in Chapel Hill, where she teaches trial skills to other attorneys. She currently serves on the Johnston County Youth Services Board and a mentor and judge with the Johnston County Teen Court Program. Most importantly, as I said, she is my daughter and I'm proud of her. Please join me in welcoming our guest speaker this evening, Attorney Aleta Ballard.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Tonight, I'm going to speak with you mostly about juvenile defense and juvenile laws in North Carolina. North Carolina falls in the minority in a lot of states. Up until 2009, we were the last state that prosecuted 16 and 17-year-olds as adults. Automatically. There was no discretion in that. If you were 16 and 17, you were charged as an adult. In 2019, we decided that we no longer wanted to be in the minority and we wanted to be a little more progressive in the way that we treated juveniles. So we enacted the Raise the Age legislation, which started in December of 2019. And Raise the Age had all of the things in it that would benefit the juveniles of North Carolina, such as we no longer automatically prosecute 16 and 17-year-olds as adults. Now they can stay in juvenile court and their cases could be handled in juvenile court. This does not mean they cannot be prosecuted as adults, but now there is a mechanism to keep them in juvenile court. And why is this beneficial for them? Juvenile court means that kids are not saddled with convictions at a very young age. Things that happen in juvenile court are sealed by the courts and can only be opened by court order. They also do not count as convictions, criminal convictions against the juvenile. So it doesn't saddle these 16 and 17-year-olds with possible criminal charges and criminal convictions that will later on deter them from getting, proper employment, sometimes educational opportunities that they were being saddled with before the raise the age legislation. I will tell anybody the raise the age legislation it's kind of like No Child Left Behind. It was a legislation that was enacted, but a lot of funding was not put behind it. So the court system now is kind of being inundated with these raise the age cases. I work as one of 2 contract attorneys in Johnston County that handle most of the juvenile cases. Juveniles are declared indigent by the nature of them being minors. So they are automatically given attorneys that they do not have to pay for. But we have found that this raise the age has also left the prosecution side with a loophole that they can still indict and move to adult court 16 and 17-year-olds. Our job is to try to keep them in juvenile court. And it depends on the crimes that they're accused of doing. Raise the age also made it that 16 and 17-year-olds are no longer held in county jails. If they are picked up and put in with what we call secured custody for juveniles, they're not incarcerated, they're placed in secured custody. They are held in juvenile detention facilities. Up until 2019, 16 and 17-year-old children were housed in the same jails with adults. They could not put them in the same cell as an adult, but they were in the same cell block with adults. So that has been something else that we've been dealing with because we do not have a juvenile detention facility in Johnston County. Currently, I have juveniles held in Brunswick, Cumberland, and Wake County. So it has been kind of overwhelming trying to keep up and travel to all of these places and have meetings with all of these juveniles because they're no longer held here in Johnston County. Where a juvenile is held is completely dependent on where there's space. It has no geographical tie to where the juvenile is from. So you can have, if there's no beds available in North Carolina, they can hold them in South Carolina. So we have to coordinate with all of these different places. And as you know, with COVID, it has been very hard to get them back and forth from all of these facilities. As one could imagine, for juveniles, it's particularly hard because juveniles until recently could not get COVID vaccinations. So we've had a lot of issues with COVID outbreaks in these juvenile detention centers. Juveniles do not have the ability like adults that are afforded bond. We have to have hearings and judges have to find certain findings that these juveniles are not a danger to the community sometimes to let them out of secured custody. So these are things that are a little different between the juvenile system and the adult system. But the one thing that I can say that was not addressed with raise the age, which is very concerning to those of us that do juvenile defense, is we are the only state with the minimum age where you can prosecute a juvenile as young as 6 years old. We are the only state with that minimum age. So that is our next goal, to try to change that minimum age. There's some states that don't have minimum ages, but of the states that have minimum ages, we have the lowest in the country, which means that if a 6-year-old, say they're in kindergarten and they get into an altercation with another 6-year-old, they can file a petition in court to be brought to juvenile court. Now, I will tell you, in my experience, I have not had a juvenile as young as 6, but I have had juveniles as young as 9. And we talk a lot about in juvenile, the prison, the school prison, the pipeline conundrum, because these courts disproportionately affect minorities and those who come from poor backgrounds, because they do not have the resources that other people have to address some of the issues. We find that a great deal of these cases come from school settings. And schools have, it used to be if you got into an altercation at school, you may get in-school suspension. You may get an out-of-school suspension. Now we're finding that they're sending these altercations to court. And it is not somewhere where you want to send your juvenile. We have parents who just don't know what resources out there, and they will call the police on their children, and they will end up in juvenile court. Juvenile court is not a place to seek services. We have many services in the county that can be accessed without court involvement. Some of them being teen court. That is one of the programs in the county that has been very beneficial. That court does not put you through a normal court. Teen court is a group of juveniles. You have a juvenile that is the prosecutor, you have a juvenile that is the defense attorney, and you'll have a juvenile that's the jury. So your peers get to pick your punishment. And the restorative justice, such as write a letter of apology, community service hours, write an essay on the effects of, marijuana on the brain. All of these things can be accomplished without putting them in the court system. We have found that it has been very beneficial to the county, and we've been able to divert juvenile cases to teen court. We have found that sometimes that their own peers are harder on them than sometimes the adults are. They hold them to their standard and they hold them accountable. I think it's a better forum than putting them in the court system. Juvenile court is kind of based on a 3 strikes premise. There's a level 1, a level 2, and level 3 disposition. Level 1 is mostly like supervision. We don't call it probation in juvenile court, it's supervision. You have a court counselor to make sure you're going to school, abiding by the rules. And then if you have another interaction or some more serious interaction, you have a level 2. Level 2 would include, it could include sending you to wilderness camp. It could include putting you on house arrest. They do have ankle bracelets for juveniles. They actually use them on juveniles. You could do detention days in a juvenile detention facility. And a lot of people say, what do these detention facilities look like? They look like mini prisons. They are not somewhere that they're getting rehabilitated. A lot of them do not finish their education while they're there. They do have some services there, but not the services that they can get on the outside. They do sleep on beds that are bolted to walls, on very thin mattresses. And a lot of people think, oh, they're going away to juvenile detention. It's kind of like a camp. No, it is like a juvie jail. And they are not rehabilitated. A lot of times when they go to these juvenile detention facilities, they come back worse than when we sent them. And it's to be used in the absolute worst case scenario. So raise the age, understood that juveniles, there's been a lot of litigation in the Supreme Court and other courts, and people recognize that juveniles just don't think like adults. They're impulsive. Their brains are not fully formed. They're easily manipulated. They don't know their moral compass values yet. The biggest case that came down from the Supreme Court is United States. It's called the Miller case, Miller versus Alabama. In that case, they have stated that a juvenile cannot automatically be given life without parole. There was a time for many, many years that you could, 1, give juveniles the death penalty, And this is something that has changed in the last 10 or so years. That you could give someone that was 16 or 17 years old, you could sentence them to death. Or you could sentence them to life without parole. With a lot of litigation, we have gotten people to finally understand that juveniles should not be held to an adult standard. And we're having a lot of things called Miller hearings now for juveniles that were sentenced to life without parole, to give them a chance to get parole, to give them a resentencing hearing, because we understand that juveniles can be rehabilitated. North Carolina has been very slow in adopting some of these things, but since 2019 and some of the things that have come down from the Supreme Court, we are now enacting a lot of legislation to protect these juveniles. Another thing that has benefited them greatly for the juveniles that were affected when we were prosecuting 16 and 17-year-olds is the Second Chance Act. If you know a 16 or 17-year-old that was convicted of a misdemeanor or a nonviolent felony when they were 16 years old, have them contact me because they are eligible for an expungement. An expungement basically means they can take that nonviolent felony off of their record, take it out of the computer like it didn't happen. Because what we couldn't do, we couldn't go back and fix all the damage that was done to these 16 and 17-year-olds when we were doing this. But it's one of the avenues that were opened up to allow them to have that second chance that they deserve, because you had 16 and 17-year-olds who were going to apply for their first job and they had to put they were convicted felons. And everyone knows that once you have that first felony, it makes it very hard to get a job. What a lot of people also don't know is that it has collateral consequences, meaning it can affect your housing. It can affect your federal financial aid. A lot of people do not know that drug offenses can disqualify you from federal financial aid. What does that mean? You no longer have access to pay for college. Now, violent felonies, murder doesn't disqualify you from federal financial aid, but drug offenses do. And it was disproportionately hurting minorities that had these drug offenses. So when they finally decided, I made this mistake when I was 16 and I'm graduating from high school and now I want to go to college, they were finding that there was no money for college, or they had to get private loans for college. And the interest on a private loan versus federal financial aid, because federal financial aid includes grants that you don't have to pay back, very low interest student loans. And they were finding that these things were disqualifying them. We had kids that were deciding to go to the military. Well, one of the things that will disqualify you from the military is a drug offense. So then they were going and they were wanting to get their lives together and start over, and they weren't able to do so. So one of the things we lobbied very hard for is to try to correct some of this damage that was done. So now they have an avenue to get some of these nonviolent felonies off of their record. Now, the one thing that we lobbied for that we didn't get is a premise called once an adult, always an adult. So if you were prosecuted in adult court when you were 16, then the law changed, they will not allow you to come back to juvenile court. Once you've have an adult conviction, you can't come to juvenile court. We lobbied very hard for that not to be a factor. There's certain things that will still be in adult court as 16 and 17-year-olds. Chapter 20 offenses, which is like speeding tickets. Those things will still be 16 and 17-year-olds will go to adult court, not juvenile court. But the fact that some juveniles could have gotten a shoplifting charge at 16 before the law changed now means they will never get the benefit of juvenile court. Like any law, we got some of the things we wanted and didn't get everything, but we continue to lobby and show them what these collateral consequences are, that these juveniles deserve a chance. And a lot of times we say, think about when you were 16 years old. If you got punished by the full extent of the law for everything you did when you were 16, would you have the job you have today? Would you have the career you have today? Would you have the successes that you have today, the housing you have today? I can't imagine being judged for the rest of your life over something you did when you were 16 years old. And that is what we were doing to children. When they were 16, we were housing them in a prison called Polk Correctional. That's where if you were under 24 years old and you went to prison, you went to Polk Correctional. Polk Correctional is also known as Gladiator School. That's what they call it. It is probably one of the most violent prisons we have in the system, because you have all of the impulsive 16, 17, 18, all the way up to 24. And 24-year-olds and 16-year-olds typically have nothing in common. And you have older people who prey on younger kids. So where they were housed was something huge for us, that juveniles need to be around other juveniles, regardless of what they've done. We don't care if it's a murder case as a juvenile or stealing some earrings from Claire's. They should not be housed with adults. They should be housed with other juveniles. But the whole premise of juvenile court is not punishment. It is to fix the problem that was done so they don't reoffend as adults. I encourage anyone to stop. We have juvenile court every other Monday. We had it this Monday. We won't have it in 2 weeks because of Memorial Day, and then we'll have it on the 7th of June. I encourage people to come by and see a juvenile session. It is not like a typical courtroom. You have, a lot of times you have therapists there, you have social workers there, you have different program providers there, and you will hear the different avenues and the things that we're trying to do to correct the behavior. We understand that delinquent behavior is a symptom of a larger problem. It could be an issue with the family. We have programs, it's called MST therapy, multi-systematic therapy, where they not only deal with the juvenile, they deal with the whole family unit to try to strengthen the family unit. The one thing that we do find in juvenile is they base these programs on a risk needs assessment. And they have not modernized this risk needs assessment. And sometimes juveniles are found to be high risk over things they have no control over, whether they're below the poverty level, whether a parent has had contact with the court system, whether you have gang involved parents, whether you have a family member. These are all things the juvenile has no control over. So they're very standardized as to what they find for risk and needs. We found in recent years, we've argued a lot that these risk and needs assessment are accurate. Because if you are middle class to upper middle class, you don't get points for certain things. If your parents have never been in trouble for anything, you don't get points for certain things to make you a higher risk and needs. But does it mean that you don't need the services? No. And just because you come from a single parent household that's below the poverty level does not automatically mean you do need services. So we've tried to tailor we don't call it punishment, the disposition to the child's needs. What does that child need from us? Do they need more support with schooling? We have some tutoring programs and programs in the area. Do they need more help with, does the family need help with food? What can we do to help this family? Is mom working long hours and she can't be there to supervise? Can we come up with a plan for someone to step in and help her kind of supervise, call in, check in with the kids? But you find that a lot in this court, you form relationships with the kids, because in juvenile court, we keep the kid from the time they enter the system to the time they either age out or leave the system. So some of my kids I've gotten when they're 10, 11, 12 years old, and I've kept them until they're 18 years old. So you form a relationship with that child. And so the court system says, I'm like their designate, I'm like their adopted auntie, because I've had them for so long. And then my juvenile clients call me about everything. They call me when their boyfriends break up with them. They call me because they're not getting along with their parents. I'm just kind of I'm kind of the mediator between the parents sometimes and the child. And I always have an open door policy for them that they can always call and they can always get help. And the other contract attorney is the very same. We love to get graduation invitations. We love to get notices that they got into college, because more times than not, we see them succeed and not fail because someone gave them that chance. Up until 2019, they didn't have that chance. I recently had a young man who made a really bad decision in an armed robbery case. And before 2019, he would have been in adult court and probably went to prison. Had a violent crime on his record. We were able to handle it in juvenile court. So now he will have no record when he gets older. He will not be punished for that for the rest of his life. He will be able to move on with his life. While he's a teenager, he still has a young child. We have a lot of teen parents in that class, and we try to encourage them to finish school. We do have a teen parent program here in Johnston County to help them finish school, help them with daycare while they're at school. But I think as far as juvenile justice in North Carolina, we are making the steps forward, but we need people to continue to lobby, continue to talk to their legislature about opening up avenues that kids are not treated like adults. I think that if people just take a minute and stop thinking how they think now as an adult, like I would never, but we sometimes forget that we did that, but we didn't have to pay for it. So I think that we have to put ourselves in that position sometimes and step back from being on our adult high horses and be like, I was once a kid too, and I made mistakes, but I was able to move past them. So I will open the floor to any questions that anyone has. Hello.
Hi, I'm Melissa. I'm sorry I was late. Yeah, I am just very moved by what you're doing and your love and your passion. And I'm so happy that change is happening. I know it's taken too long already, and it's not enough yet. So I guess my question might be, and you might have talked about this before I came, was the network of partners that you have that is working to get the legislation that has achieved advances. So,
We have the Office of the Juvenile Defender out of Raleigh. They lobby very hard for juvenile laws. But the biggest thing is to hear from the community. Because a lot of times they say, you know, the community wants these children to be punished and they do adult crimes and they should get adult punishments. But from the community and talking to your legislature about the raise the age changes. I think a lot of people just don't know what the juvenile laws are in North Carolina, so they're not aware of what needs to be changed. I think if more people knew you could put a 6-year-old in juvenile court, people would be outraged by it and be calling their legislatures like, we can't do this. They're 6 years old.
right.
I think the biggest thing is to make people aware about what's going on. A lot of people aren't aware of the collateral consequences. So I think the biggest thing is write your legislatures, you know, get your groups together and, you know, write petitions about getting rid of that minimum age. I think that's the next biggest change we need in North Carolina.
So this is Diana. What age would you say that the children should go into juvenile court? And rather than, I mean, what would happen? A 6-year-old, would you put a 6-year-old in with a guardian ad litem in a foster home or something? What would you do?
They could remove a juvenile from their home at 6. They cannot send them to a youth detention center, like a youth prison. They cannot send them there. The minimum age for that is 10, which is still very young. But I had a 9-year-old, and literally being in front of the judge made him so nauseous that he got sick in court because he was scared to death that something was going to happen to him. Most kids that age do not need a court intervention. The fact that they got in trouble alone scares them. So for a 6-year-old, they can put them on juvenile probation, juvenile supervision. They could require them to do community service. They could require them to do a lot of things, but even bringing them in there with the older kids, to me, is more detrimental to them than anything a 6-year-old can do.
Yeah. It just seems,
One of the board members, and because I had a big concern about a 6-year-old being into juvenile court, I said, who actually makes that referral? And they said the school. And I said, come on. And I said, so the 6-year-old makes commit a crime in the 1st grade, and then you're gonna send him to court? I said, this can't happen in Judson County. So I brought that up, and so they did the research. They said they have never, don't have any intention of referring a 6-year-old to court. I said, thank God.
But it doesn't have to just come from the school. It can also be referred by law enforcement. Law enforcement can also send petitions. So while the school may have that policy, it's not a countywide edict that you cannot send a 6-year-old to juvenile court. Now, most of the time, they're going to laugh at them for wanting to send a 6-year-old to court because they're 6. That's what 6-year-olds do. But you can get referred from law enforcement or from school.
Does anybody else have any questions?
yes. I mean, don't you, I just wonder if for someone who's 6 years old, it seems like there needs to be some responsibility of the adults in that person's life, that child's life. That if a 6-year-old is so out of control that they're supposed to be going to court, it seems to me that someone else is responsible for that, not the 6-year-old.
I agree, but you will find that in juvenile court, a lot of times the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And there is not a lot of supervision, and the parents have their own issues. The one thing about juvenile court that's different is not only is the juvenile under the jurisdiction of the court once a kid is brought there, the parents are under the jurisdiction of the court. So if the parents don't comply, they can go to jail.
Oh, awesome. Great.
Right, except for then if the parents are in jail, then who looks after the kid?
Exactly.
And all the emotional trauma, which is the real damage, you know?
It does starts a cycle, because if the parent in jail, then the child might end up in Department of Social Services custody. Then the child, traumatized by that.
Yeah.
But
Like,
normally,
yeah, we need to be the ones who are responsible. I mean,
yes,
we're the community.
exactly. And that's why I said the community needs to, if you ever have a family that's in crisis or needs some type of services, feel free to always reach out for me. I will.
Put your email in the chat.
Okay, let's see. I am more than willing to help any families with the resources in the area. Because a lot of parents go through juvenile court thinking that they're going to get their kids services, and it's totally not what they thought it was going to be. But there are a lot of programs that you can get involved with. DSS has programs that don't involve any court involvement, but they have resources for other things. If, food is an issue, daycare is the issue, substance abuse is the issue. We know a lot of substance abuse programs in the area that are willing to give help. People just need to reach out for it and know that it's out there. A lot of parents get frustrated. And they're like, I want to teach them a lesson. And I'm like, this is not the way to teach them a lesson. Yes, kids need to be accountable. There needs to be consequences, but this is not the lesson that you want to teach them. Because you don't want them to court to be a normal thing for them. You want it to be something that they don't want to go to.
It feels like to me, and so I'm just jumping in here out of nowhere. So it just with an idea, seems to me that the bigger community, not, you shouldn't necessarily hold the parents responsible because maybe this happened to them, right?
Yes.
Or something like this. So it's already what we need to do is it seems to me that offering positive alternatives, actually kind of coming and just saying, what is it that's missing in your life? What would you like?
Yes.
This bad behavior happened, but let's forget about that. You're not going to do that anymore. What would you like to do?
I completely agree. I grew up in the DC area, so we had a lot of things for kids to do after school, after hours, on weekends. I think the lack of things for kids to do gives them a lot of idle time.
Uh-huh.
So like where I grew up had like midnight basketball leagues in the summertime that they would open the gyms and the kids could play basketball late instead of running the streets. We had, things at the community center would put on things. People in the community just having different events and things for the kids to do, because you find that kids with a lot of idle time find trouble to get into because they're bored.
Right.
And I think that's the biggest thing that we find is kids are bored and have nothing to do. Because typically everything shuts down by 9-10 o'clock, it's pretty much shut down. And when they have things in the summer and they're out of school, and it's been particularly hard with COVID in virtual school because they're not in school 6 hours a day, they're home all day long. So they're just finding things to do because they're bored.
Right. Yeah.
And we
Okay,
as adults don't make it easy because we leave our cars unlocked and our keys in the car, so they just jump in and drive off.
okay, does anyone else have any question? If not, well, I'm gonna stop sharing.
If I had a hat on, I would take it off.
Okay, I'm trying to stop sharing here.
Really, you've really moved me. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
I'm just so full of admiration for you.
Well, thank you.
Just your dedication. I wish I could be, I guess if I say I wish I could be as dedicated as you, I think that I'm going in too many directions. I mean, my brain does that.
I understand.
But I just love what you're doing. And I thank you for coming and speaking with us.
It was a pleasure to come talk with you.
Okay, thank you, Aleta. So we have a certificate for you.
Oh, thank you.
The Rotary E Club of District 7710 certificate of appreciation is hereby granted to Aleta Ballard for imparting valuable insight and inspiration as our guest speaker this evening. Awarded May 18th, 2021. Doris Wallace, President, 2020-21. Rotary E Club of District 7710. So thank you so very much. If you want me to email this to you, I can do this as well, or can you download it and print it yourself? What's your pleasure?
Can you email it to me, please?
I will do that. So I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to stop recording. So thank everyone for coming to the meeting this evening. Oh, I just want to say one thing quickly, but I'm going to stop the recording.